The screen of the tablet glowed in George's small hands. He sat cross-legged on the floor of Kensington Palace, his tongue sticking out in concentration. The device was his father's strictly off-limits, but William had left it on the desk after a late-night call. And George, curious as ever, couldn't resist. He tapped the screen. Icons blinked to life. One caught his Aja, small helicopter symbol, with the word drone control beneath it. George's eyes widened. He loved helicopters. His grandfather had taken him to see the Royal Fleet once. He dreamed of flying ever since. He pressed the icon. Somewhere in the palace grounds, a soft worry sound began. A security drone, normally used for perimeter checks, hummed to life in its charging dock. Its rotors spun faster. Within seconds, it lifted off the ground and hovered silently in the cool morning air. George watched the screen in amazement. A live video feed appeared. Trees, stone pathways, the palace gardens from above. He could control it. His fingers slid across the screen, and the drone responded, tilting left, then right. He giggled softly. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe. We share the most emotional and powerful true stories every week. You won't want to miss what happens next. George guided the drone higher. The feed showed the palace roof now, glinting in the early sunlight. He felt like a pilot. Like his father, the drone swooped low over the rose garden, where his mother often walked with Charlotte and Louis. Empty now. He steered it toward the west wing. That's when he saw movement. A figure stood near the old chapel entrancer, part of the palace grounds rarely used. The person wore dark clothing and kept looking around nervously. George squinted at the screen. He didn't recognize them. They weren't wearing a palace uniform. The figure pulled something from a bag. A camera with a long lens. They raised it toward a window on the second floor of the private quarters. George's smile faded. Something felt wrong. He'd been taught about privacy, about people who tried to take pictures of the family. Bad people, his parents called them. He should tell someone. But if he did, they'd know he'd taken the tablet. He'd be in trouble. Big trouble. The man with the camera moved closer to the building, staying in the shadows. The drone hovered silently above, recording everything. George's heart pounded. He bit his lip. What should he do? George's finger froze over the screen. The man below adjusted his camera, aiming it carefully at the palace windows. Through the drone's camera, George could see the man's face, clearly now. Intense, focused. He wore a dark jacket with the collar pulled up. The boy's breath came faster. He knew he should put the tablet down and find his father. But William was in a meeting. His mother was with Charlotte at her ballet lesson. The security guards were at their posts, but George didn't know how to reach them. And there was something else. A thought that made his stomach twist with guilt. If he told anyone, they'd take the tablet away. They'd know he'd disobeyed. His father had been stern the last time no screens for a week. This time would be worse. The man moved again, this time pulling out a small notebook. He scribbled something, then took more pictures. He seemed to be documenting something. Counting windows, maybe, or noting positions. George's hands trembled slightly as he kept the drone steady. It was still recording, everything. The tablet showed a small red dot in the corner of the recording indicator. He hadn't even realized he'd activated it. Minutes passed. The man worked methodically, moving from window to window along the west wing. He checked his watch several times, waiting for something, perhaps, or timing something. Then voices echoed across the grounds. The man's head snapped up. 2 gardeners appeared around the corner, pushing wheelbarrows full of mulch. They were laughing, talking about football. The man quickly shoved his camera into his bag and walked briskly toward the far wall. He moved with purpose, but not panic, like someone who knew exactly where he was going. Near the old iron gate that led to the service road, he glanced back once, then slipped through. The drone's camera watched him disappear down the street. George sat very still. The gardeners continued their work, completely unaware. The morning sun climbed higher. Birds sang in the trees. Everything looked normal, peaceful, but George's heart still raced. He'd seen something he wasn't supposed to see, and now that man was gone, vanished into the city. No one else knew. Just him. His finger hovered over the power button. He could shut it all down. Delete everything. Pretend it never happened. The man was gone anyway. Maybe he was just a tourist who got confused. Maybe it was nothing but those pictures. The way the man had moved. The nervous glances. George looked at the closed door of his room. He could hear footsteps in the hallway outside. Staff members going about their duties. Normal palace life. He looked back at the screen. The drone hovered silently, waiting for his command. The recording had captured everything. 23 minutes of footage. Timer said. 23 minutes of evidence. George's throat felt tight. He was 9 years old, and he'd just witnessed something that adults should know about. But telling them meant admitting what he'd done. He took a shaky breath and made a decision. George landed the drone carefully, watching the screen as it descended back to its charging station. His fingers were sweaty on the tablet's smooth surface. The device gave a soft chime. Drone secured. Recording saved. He stared at that last part. Recording saved. The words seemed to glow with accusation. The tablet's home screen showed various apps and files. George navigated clumsily through menus he barely understood until he found a folder labeled security footage. Inside was his video file, time-stamped with today's date and morning hour. His thumb moved to the delete button. One tap, and it would be gone. No evidence of the intruder. No evidence of his disobedience. But that man's face flashed in his mind. The deliberate way he'd photographed their home. The secret, careful movements. George closed his eyes. His father always talked about duty, about responsibility, about doing the right thing even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. He opened his eyes and set the tablet down carefully on his father's desk, exactly where it had been. Then he walked out of the room, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found William 20 minutes later, emerging from his meeting in the East Conference Room. His father's face showed the tired lines that appeared when he'd been dealing with official business. He loosened his tie slightly as he walked. "Papa," George said quietly. William looked down, his expression softening instantly. "Hello, George. Shouldn't you be at your lessons?" "Not until 10. George's voice came out smaller than he intended. "Papa, I need to tell you something." Something in his tone made William stop walking. He glanced at his private secretary, who was following him. "Give us a moment, please." The man nodded and stepped away discreetly. William crouched down to George's level, his eyes searching his son's face. "What's wrong? You look upset." George's carefully prepared words tangled in his throat. I took your tablet. I'm sorry. I know I wasn't supposed to, but I found something and slowed down." William's voice was calm, but alert now. "You took my tablet?" "Yes, and I accidentally started the security drone." The words rushed out faster. "But there was a man, Papa, in the West grounds. By the old chapel. He had a camera. A big one. He was taking pictures of the palace, of our windows. And he was hiding, and William's expression changed completely. The gentle father vanished, replaced by something sharper, harder. "When was this?" "Just now. Maybe 30 minutes ago?" He left through the service gate. William stood immediately, his hand on George's shoulder. "Show me." They walked quickly back to William's office. George's legs struggled to keep up with his father's long strides. Inside, William picked up the tablet and navigated through it with swift, practiced movements. He found the drone control app, the security footage folder. He pressed play. George watched his father's face as the video played. William's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. When the man pulled out the camera and began photographing the windows, William's hand clenched around the tablet. The video continued. 4 minutes. 7. 12. William watched every second in absolute silence. When it ended, he immediately picked up his phone. "This is William. I need the security chief in my office now, and contact the Metropolitan Police. We've had a breach." He looked down at George, and his expression was complicated, concern, pride, worry, all mixed together. "You did the right thing telling me." But George, that man could have been dangerous. Very dangerous. You should have come to me immediately. I know, George whispered. I was scared I'd be in trouble. William set the phone down and knelt again. Listen to me. Your safety, your family's safety is more important than any rule about tablets or screens or anything else. Do you understand? Always? If you see something wrong, you tell me right away. Promise. George nodded, tears pricking his eyes. Promise. Heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. The security chief arrived, his face grave. William stood and handed him the tablet. We have a security breach. 40 minutes ago, West Grounds. This footage shows everything. The palace transformed within minutes. Security personnel moved through the grounds with quiet urgency. Radios crackled with coded messages. The service gate was locked down. George sat on the sofa in his father's office. Watching it all through the window, William stood at his desk, speaking in low, clipped tones with the security chief and 2 Metropolitan Police officers who'd arrived with remarkable speed. The tablet sat between them. The video paused on a clear shot of the intruder's face. We're running facial recognition now, one officer said, tapping notes into a device. The quality is excellent. This drone has a better camera than most of our equipment. We'll need to review all access points, the security chief added, his face grim. Find out how he got in. The fact that he knew about the old chapel area suggests reconnaissance. This wasn't opportunistic. William's voice was steel. I want every frame of that footage analyzed. Where he looked, what he focused on, everything. And I want to know if he's part of something larger. George hugged his knees to his chest. The weight of what he'd accidentally uncovered pressed down on him. This wasn't just about a man with a camera. This was serious, dangerous. A female officer approached William. Sir, we should consider that he may have been specifically watching the family's movements. The West Wing windows he focused on, those are the private quarters. The children's rooms. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. William's hand gripped the edge of the desk. What are you suggesting? We can't rule anything out yet. But the level of detail in his photography, the systematic approach, we need to treat this as a potential targeting situation until we know otherwise. George didn't fully understand all the words, but he understood the fear that flickered across his father's face. William turned and saw George watching. His expression softened with visible effort. George, why don't you go find your mother? Let her know I'll be a bit longer. Is everyone safe? George asked quietly. The adults exchanged glances. William crossed the room and sat beside his son. Yes, everyone is safe. And you know why? Because you were brave enough to tell me what you saw. You helped keep us safe. But I shouldn't have taken the tablet. No, you shouldn't have. William's voice was firm, but not harsh. And we'll discuss that later. But right now, I need you to understand something. What you did flying that drone, recording that man that might have prevented something very bad, you noticed something wrong when no one else did. That takes a good eye and good judgment. A knock at the door interrupted them. Another officer entered, holding a printed photograph. Sir, we have an identification. The facial recognition got a hit. William stood quickly. Who is he? The officer's face was troubled. His name is Marcus Holden. Freelance photographer. But that's not the concerning part. 6 months ago, he was questioned in connection with a tabloid phone hacking scandal. Nothing was proven, but he's known for aggressive tactics, getting shots that shouldn't be possible. What kind of shots? Private family moments, children's bedrooms, medical appointments. He sells to the highest bidder tabloids, foreign press, online gossip sites. The officer paused. Last month, he was spotted near Prince Harry's residence in California. Security moved him along, but no charges were filed. The room fell silent. William's voice was dangerously quiet. So he's following us systematically. It appears so. And based on the footage young George captured, he's planning something. The notes in his notebook, the way he counted windows. Our analysts think he might be planning an extended surveillance operation, possibly attempting to place hidden cameras or long-range listening devices. George's stomach twisted. Hidden cameras. In their home? Watching them, William's jaw clenched. Where is he now? We've issued an alert. Every officer in London has his photo. We're checking airports, train stations. His flat in Shoreditch is under surveillance. The officer glanced at George, then back to William. Sir, we're recommending enhanced security protocols, especially for the children. Implement them immediately. The adults continued talking, their voices a blur of security terms and protocols. George stared at the carpet, his mind racing. That man Marcus Holden had been looking at his window. Charlotte's window. Lewis's window? Because of a stolen tablet and a curious 9-year-old boy, they'd caught him. But what if George hadn't been curious? What if he'd put the tablet back and never activated the drone? What would that man have done? The thought made him feel cold all over. The day had turned into a blur of activity that George only half understood. Catherine had been told, and she'd held George tightly, saying nothing, just holding him. Charlotte and Louis were kept occupied by their nanny in another wing of the palace, unaware of the tension crackling through the adults. By evening, the investigation had expanded. Police found Marcus Holden's flat filled with disturbing evidence telephoto lenses, sound amplification equipment, and worst of all, a detailed map of palace routines. Arrival times? Guard rotations. When the children left for school, he'd been watching them for weeks. George sat at dinner that night, pushing food around his plate. His parents spoke in careful, measured tones, trying to maintain normalcy for Charlotte and Louis. But George could see the strain in his mother's smile, the way his father's hand kept checking his phone after the younger children were taken to bed. William called George into the study. "Sit with me," William said. Patting the chair beside him, George climbed up. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the wood-paneled walls. "I had a long conversation with the police," William began. "Marcus Holden has been arrested. He was trying to board a flight to Amsterdam. They found more equipment in his luggage cameras, disguised as everyday objects. He was planning to return and install them around the palace grounds." George's eyes widened. "But you stopped him. You stopped him. Because of you." William turned to face his son fully. "George, I need you to understand something. What you did today, it wasn't just about catching one bad person. You stopped something that could have hurt our family badly. Not physically, but in other ways. Our privacy, our safety, our peace of mind." "I was just playing with the drone," George said quietly. "No. But sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences." William paused, choosing his words carefully. "That man wanted to watch us. To capture our private moments and sell them to people who think they have a right to know everything about our lives. He wanted to make money by invading our home." George thought about this. He'd seen the photographers outside sometimes, shouting and clicking cameras, but this was different. This was someone trying to get inside. "Are there more people like him?" George asked. William's face was honest. "Yes, there are. That's why we have security. That's why we have rules about privacy and safety. The world is fascinated by our family and most people mean no harm. But some people," he trailed off, "some people cross lines that should never be crossed." "I won't take your tablet again," George said. "I promise." A faint smile touched William's lips. "I know you won't. But George, here's what I want you to remember. You made a mistake by taking something that wasn't yours. But when you discovered something wrong, you made the right choice. You told the truth, even though you were afraid of getting in trouble. That's character. That's what matters." Catherine entered the study, her face soft with emotion. She'd been crying, George realized. She sat on George's other side and pulled him close. "My brave boy," she whispered. "Do you know what you did today?" George shook his head. "You've protected your family. You kept your brother and sister safe. You did what many adults wouldn't have had the courage to do. You admitted a mistake because it was the right thing to do." The weight of the day pressed down on George's shoulders. He was 9 years old, and he'd stopped a bad man from hurting his family. It felt too big. Too scary. Too important. "I just wanted to fly the helicopter," he said, his voice cracking. William laughed softly. sadly. "I know, son. I know." They sat together by the fire, the three of them, as the palace settled into its evening quiet. Outside, new security measures were being implemented. Additional guards walked the grounds. Advanced detection systems were being installed. But in that moment, in that room, George felt safe, protected, loved, and tomorrow. The newspapers would run stories about enhanced palace security and potential threats neutralized. But they would never know about a curious 9-year-old boy and a wayward drone. That story would remain private, as it should be. Some heroes, Liam thought as he looked at his son, are too young to be named. 3 weeks later, life at the palace had returned to its careful, normal rhythm. The new security measures had become routine. Marcus Holden was facing multiple charges, and his network of contacts, other photographers and tabloid journalists who'd commissioned similar invasions, were under investigation. George hadn't touched his father's tablet since that morning. He hadn't needed to. William had surprised him with his own device, heavily locked down, child-safe, but his own. A reward, his father said, for good judgment when it mattered most. But something had changed in George. He noticed things now. The way security guards positioned themselves. The cameras mounted discreetly in corners. The careful way his parents scanned crowds during public appearances. He saw the invisible shields that surrounded his family, and he understood why they were necessary. One afternoon, George stood at the window of his room looking out over the palace grounds. The drone charging station was visible near the security office. It sat silent now, waiting for official use only. Charlotte appeared in his doorway. "George, Mummy says we're going to the park. Want to come?" George turned. His sister stood there in her coat, 7 years old and oblivious to how close danger had come. Louis toddled past in the hallway, giggling at something. "Yeah," George said. "I'm coming." As they walked through the palace halls, George caught sight of his father in conversation with the security chief. William looked up, caught George's eye, and gave him a small nod. A private acknowledgement. A shared understanding. George nodded back. In the car on the way to the park, Charlotte chattered about her ballet recital. Louis played with his toy car, making engine noises. Catherine sat beside them, relaxed and smiling. The security detail followed at a respectful distance, invisible to the children, but ever present. Normal life, protected life. That evening, as George lay in bed, William came in to say goodnight. He sat on the edge of the mattress, the weight of him familiar and comforting. "Papa," George said quietly, "do you ever get scared? Of the bad people?" William considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But fear isn't always a bad thing, George. It makes us careful. It makes us pay attention. The important thing is not letting fear stop us from living our lives. Is that why we still go out? Even though there are people with cameras? That's exactly why. We can't let other people's bad behavior make us hide. We take precautions. We're smart, but we don't hide." William brushed hair from George's forehead. "You showed me something important that day. You showed me that even when things go wrong, even when we make mistakes, we can still do the right thing. We can still protect what matters." George yawned. "The drone was really cool, though." William laughed quietly. "It was, wasn't it? Maybe when you're a bit older, I'll teach you to fly it properly. The right way, promise?" "Promise." William kissed George's forehead and stood to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at his sleeping son. 9 years old, already learning the weight of duty, already understanding that being royal meant living with constant scrutiny, constant risk, but also learning that family, protected family. That courage came in small moments. That doing the right thing mattered more than avoiding trouble in his own office later. William reviewed the final police report on Marcus Holden. The investigation had uncovered a network of privacy violations spanning years. Multiple families, both royal and celebrity, had been targeted. The case would likely result in new legislation. About privacy rights and surveillance? All. Because a curious boy had found a tablet and accidentally activated a drone. William smiled faintly and closed the report. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new security briefings, new threats to assess. But tonight, his children slept safely in their beds. The palace stood secure. The family was together, and sometimes that was enough. Outside George's window, the palace grounds lay quiet under a blanket of stars. The drone sat in its charging station, ready for the next time it was needed. But for now, it rested. Having already served its purpose in the most unexpected way possible, a child's curiosity had become a family's shield, and in the morning, life would continue careful, protected, but lived fully nonetheless, because that's what they did. That's what they'd always done, and that's what they'd keep doing, together, no matter what challenges came next.